And now we are getting to our main topic today. We are continuing our tour of the fifth edition version of Planescape. For the last few episodes, that's right, for the last few episodes, we covered Sigil and the Outlands. But this week, we are diving headfirst into Morte's Planar Parade, the monster book of this three-book trilogy of Planescape goodness. What's in the monster book? Well, to sum it up, 64 pages of monsters. Most of the book is going to be stat blocks, but there are some pages with introduction and guidance, and then a couple pages of planar encounters divided up into tables. So let us dive in head first, screaming all the way into the plains. And Teos is holding up some of the wonderful art from the book. What do we get first in our book? We get an introduction called Multiversal Menagerie. Mort is the one who's going to lead us through this look at planar creatures and other planar information. So we get amongst the stat blocks little blurbs from Mort telling us his take on the monsters, on the planes, on the people who travel the planes. Any initial thoughts, Teos, before we dive in?
I like the concept, right? The idea of using, as they've done with Tasha's and all these other books, someone who speaks. And then Morte is funny. He has this sort of, everything is humorous and wry and it's in its way, sarcastic and all of that. So I appreciate that. I like that the book it's not just monsters. It starts with some really useful information. And as we'll talk about at the end, also has something that's kind of made to be useful. Yeah, it's a for what it is. It's a good way to organize it. I think a thing that is a big deal with this. We'll talk more about this at the end, but it is just 64 pages. So when you look at the book, like it's almost its pages are almost outdone by the or equaled by the thickness of the cover itself, and so.
Right.
So it is a concise thing, right? This is a small part of the overall product.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get into what that means for this book as we go through it. But first, we get information on using a stat block. You're told to see the monster manual for how to use a stat block. Okay, that saves us a few pages there. It does specifically call out two things. It calls out weapons or spell casting that are not normal rules for those weapons or spells that are in a stat block are abnormal because of the creature, not because of the spell or the weapon. Because what you'll see a lot is take a huge arch demon or demon lord or archdevil, and it
Mm-hmm.
says, wait, they use a great sword, but it does 6d10 damage. Well, if I defeat this demon, then the sword that as I wield it must do 6d10 damage. So they specifically call out, no, a long sword still does 1d8 or 1d10 if you're using it in two hands
Mm-hmm.
as a versatile weapon. It's only 6d10 because of who's wielding it, not because
Yeah.
of that. And the second thing they call out is monsters sometimes get a class designation, and that is done so because there might be a prerequisite for magic items that they're using. So they want you to know that this creature fills that prerequisite, using a wand that only wizards can use because they qualify as a wizard to use that weapon or item, which I thought was the first I get, right? I
Mm-hmm.
see that. The second one, I don't know. Am I missing something about why that's important? Or
It's one of those things that just never comes up, and I feel like we don't even need a rule. Like, just go, if you think this thing should be able to use a wizard staff, good grief, do it. Like, why would
yeah,
you want or need some sort of keyword to enable that,
yeah,
right? Like, I just it's
right,
sometimes I think D&D, especially in fifth edition, gets caught up in its own self around the logic of its language.
Yeah.
and it's okay. Like, just it doesn't have. I don't think people gain much through this, and just it's more
Yeah.
space eaten up for no reason. If you're not going to use it as a keyword that really impacts things, just strip that out of there. I don't need to know that every undead doesn't breathe except for 3. Just think I can make that call.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess as I was running it through in my head, I guess it's for the same reason as the original point, which is if a creature has a wand that only wizards are supposed to use, and the characters take the wand and they're like, well, this demon isn't a wizard, so this must be a staff of wizardry that anyone can use, not just wizards, right? So that must be why. I could see it. I wish it didn't have to be there, I guess,
Yeah.
is the long and the short of that.
There's this stat blocks by challenge rating table. And I think a lot of times DMs out there are curious, what's the breadth of this? And it goes from 0 to 26, though it's worth noting there are only 3 monsters that are 20, 22, 26. There are a good number that are 10 and above, maybe, I don't know, not quite half, maybe a third are in the tens. And then there are a lot that are 9 and lower. And that might be a little bit surprising. I think to me, a lot of these monsters, when I looked up in the book, I thought to myself, oh, this is probably like a CR10 creature. Oh, no, it's 4, And on one hand, that means that you can have planar adventures at any level, which is certainly historically true with Sigil, right? Level 1 adventures in Sigil. If you are expecting this to be a book of CR20 and higher creatures, no, it will not be that. It's a breadth kind of typical of most monster products.
Yeah. And one thing about this chart that I found interesting just in terms of usage was I didn't look at the physical book. I looked at D&D Beyond, and you can sort by CR, by stat block name, or by creature type, which is the first time I've seen that I've been able to do that. Now, maybe it's you've always been able to, and I've just never noted it. But I love the fact that I could just say, oh, I'm going to sort by CR. I need a CR7 monster. Okay, there they are. Or, oh, I need an aberration. I'm going to sort by creature type, and I get all the aberrations listed. Thought that was pretty nifty, and one of the positives of having a book that's digital.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it shows you that actually there are a lot of humanoids here. There are a lot of celestials, right? Those are the 2 types you'll see the most of. And I think I wouldn't have expected that necessarily, right? Again, like may not quite fit what you think the product would provide.
Yeah. I want my plant. I want my extra planar plants or oozes.
Yeah.
I guess I'll have to make my own.
You get one and it's CR1 or 0,
yeah,
I think.
Exactly. So then we move on to petitioners. This was where I started scratching my head. So petitioners, this is the exact text for the creature. Petitioners are former mortals. They've lived, ceased living, and now exist on outer planes. They typically inhabit a plane that shares their alignment or the realm of a deity they worship. Some, however, become lost and wander the planes, or make new homes for themselves elsewhere on the Great Wheel. And it tells 2 features you can add to make a creature a petitioner. The first is plane locked. They can't leave the plane they're on, even through portals. The second is soul shape. They can be resurrected only through true resurrection or a wish spell. And even then, they may choose to remain a petitioner instead of going back to their mortal form. And I'm reading this going, if I had never read any other D&D content, right, what is a petitioner? I understand they're former mortals. I understand that they've died and now exist in the outer planes. So what? What does that mean? What? And then we get a section called Death in the Planes. And it sort of answers it, but not really. It says that mortals that die have their souls returned to the outer planes. They go wherever their alignment says they should go, or if they worshipped a deity, they may go to that plane where the deity that they worshipped resides. If you kill a petitioner,
Actually, does it say that? I think you're adding more than it
Oh,
says.
uh, maybe. Yeah.
You're
I
adding
thought I
more. It says less than you just said, I think. It just
that's true.
says
It
it
does. I
they
thought it
they
may
are
have said that.
they
Okay, I
return
guess
as
not.
petitioners in far-flung reaches of the outer planes. There they manifest as idealized versions of themselves. Um, and something about sharing its alignment. It can reconstitute on a plane that shares its alignment
So
after
it's
100 years, or it
alignment.
might choose to become one with that plane and never return
Okay.
when it's destroyed.
Uh-huh.
And that when it, this is interesting, a creature that reforms on the planes multiple times becomes increasingly dissimilar from its original mortal form. I want to talk about that later, put a pin in it. But yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead with your thought, because I think that is really interesting.
Yeah. So all of this could be interesting, but I don't know what it means. What does
Mm,
it mean in the larger scale of these these outer plates? Are these petitioners important, or are they just window dressing? If they're
yeah.
just window dressing, then why are they here? If I come across a petitioner in a certain realm, if it's in a certain outer plane, what what's that like? What are they trying to do? Do they have goals? Do they have goals based on the plane that they're on? Do they want something? Do they not want something? Can they give me information? What do they have? I just don't know. And so, like, an idealized version of themselves, what does that mean? Does that mean someone becomes what they think they are, the best version of, or the worst version of themselves? If it's I don't
Yeah.
get what that means.
And maybe they were afraid to push the Forgotten Realms view, where you end up in Kalimvor's role, and before that it was Cyric, or to go to the Raven Queen. You know, do you go to Greyhawk and talk about Nerol? Because there are these conflicting views. I think it's often been novels that have pushed this role
Mhm.
of the petitioner, and then designers have run with it without maybe ever really fully thinking through. And maybe they were a little,
Right.
maybe they held back from talking about it because they were worried that setting down one viewpoint would make it obvious. But as you said, it's a really interesting concept. You know, what happens to someone when they die? Do they go straight to the outer planes? Do they go to an intermediate place? What is the process by which you end up not in one of those places, the destination outer plane? You know, how would you end up in Sigil, and how do people feel about a petitioner wandering around Sigil or the Outlands? Like
Yeah.
that is kind of interesting. But I agree with you now that I hadn't thought about it reading it, because I've got these ideas of what petitioners are in my brain. But you're right, it
Right.
doesn't really tell you what to do with this.
Yeah, and the word itself, petitioner, you are petitioning for something.
Yeah,
And so the immediate question, just based on the word, is what are you petitioning for?
yeah,
What is it that you want? And I think the idea is supposed to be you are trying to get to your final resting
yes,
place, but you need to do something to get there. You need to prove it, right? The
yeah,
pearly gates where you have to give a reckoning for all your life is one way to look at it, right?
yeah,
Balance, you weigh your vices versus your
yeah,
virtues, right?
yeah.
There's all these different things that could be, but we don't see petitioners petitioning. We don't get it explained
Right.
to us. And so that's what I would use the gate towns
Well,
for.
and Shawn, I mean, if that's what they are, then this text should be reinforcing that, because the number one thing, unless they've given up, they should be trying to get to their destination and their
Right.
proper afterlife. And they don't say that. Like, that's like, wait,
Yeah.
what? Because that's the thing. That's what we're doing here, right? Like, and that
Right.
should be the interesting thing. You meet a petitioner, what is the place they're trying to go to, or do they not even know, right? That could be really cool adventure fodder, but you're not given
Right.
those raw ingredients or the recipe here that leads to what to do with a petitioner.
Yeah. So yeah. So if you're actually in the your final resting place, if you're at the final, should be no longer a petitioner, right?
Right,
You've
right.
you've gotten there. Uh, Now you maybe there's an area of that plane where you are held until you can go to another place within that plane. But it's just there's so much here that's ripe for story, ripe
Yeah.
for adventuring.
Hmm.
You have to find a petitioner and help them. You have to stop a petitioner from getting to the final resting place, right? All of these things are great adventure hooks or story points, but we need to know that it's a thing before we can use it.
And you've got a note here about petitioners. The gate towns could be places where petitioners go, right? Like that could be the key.
Mhm.
And you're right. It makes a lot of sense that if you are a petitioner, you would, and you found yourself in Sigil, you'd want to get to the gate town. So you'd be looking for
Mhm.
that gate. If you're in a gate town, you want to get into that plane, but maybe you can't. And boy, that creates a lot of ideas, but it
Mhm.
also creates purpose for the gate towns and for the factions,
Mhm.
because the factions could be going after these petitioners saying, hey, no, join us instead. Or,
Mhm.
you know, let me help you get to the plane I think you should go to rather than the one that maybe you thought
Right.
you should go to. Were you really that close to Mistra? Come on, let's be honest.
Mhm.
There's some
Right.
other, have you heard of the Greyhawk magic deities? Come over this way. I mean, there
Yeah.
could be some really interesting things there.
Mhm.
Yeah, cool.
Or if you know of a soul that's heading for a place that they definitely don't want to go to, you've been bad, you're on your way to the nine hells, and it's not going to be pleasant for you once you
Yeah.
get there, right? You could try to help people not be sent there. So one town could be helping people get there, but there's a block. One could be helping people escape from there, but there's a block.
Yeah.
Um, so
Mm.
it's great stuff, but it's about 50 words in the book. Uh, and it's just so much more needs to be talked about there.
Yeah. Good catch.
Uh, Next, we get Planar Influences, and this is a very long section of the book that tells us what happens when a creature is steeped in one the influence of a plane. So if you spend time in an outer plane or an area under that plane's influence, like a gate town, perhaps, you may have your alignment moved toward that plane if you're there long enough. Which it makes sense. It's something that I could see happening, and
It does. And I don't know if this is the right place to mention this, though, but there's been this interesting conversation on our Discord about comparing 2E to 5E. And
Mhm.
we talked about last episode how we were marking on how the gate towns, the kind of story you hear is, well, if a gate town becomes too much like its plane, it just gets absorbed into its plane. And but you can't go into the gate town that is for pandemonium and stop the winds or do that in any way that feels measurable, or impactful, because the plane sort of wins in the end. It's either going to absorb it or keep pushing these influences on it. So that's just the way it is. But what the folks on our Discord were talking about is how in 2E, the emphasis, and there was some quotes shared, was really on how a plane could be changed, and that place could be pulled out of that plane and end up in another plane. And that actually is a really important change of emphasis, where you could now do things, right? You could say, hey, let's take this town and move it from the hells to another place, right?
Mhm.
Move it, change its nature, and have a lasting impact. I like that emphasis better. But
Mhm.
this whole section is really under that assumption that, hey, the presence of the planes will change you.
Mhm.
And therefore, creatures that are touched by a particular plane, here's how you can represent them in the game. And overall, I have the feeling that this section is a little too like what a librarian, someone in biology would do, rather than the game aspect of it. Because a lot of
Mhm.
these, they're all traits, and the traits that you add to monsters are sometimes a little too like, because this is the clinical thing that happens, rather than being cool, fun expressions of what these things could do for those particular planes to make the game engaging and interesting. And, oh, this thing is abyssal touched, right? sometimes it's a little just flat because, oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's a spectrum of things that you can do, and it's not a spectrum that's just on one plane.
Mm-hmm.
Not plane in the sense of, you know,
Yeah.
dimensions, not plane in the sense of Planescape. Because you okay, I'm going to run a story in the Abyss or the Abyss's Gate Town. I want to show that the spiders that the characters fight here are abyssal spiders, not normal giant spiders. So what can I do? I like I like that it lists some cosmetic things. They've got
Mm-hmm.
black blood, they have horns, they have scales. I
Mm-hmm.
like the trying to figure out how to say this diplomatically and thoroughly. I like that there are some changes here, but like you said, some of them are things that the players will never engage with. A creature is poison tolerant if it's from the abyss, unless the characters use poison, which is rare. Okay, it doesn't
And
really tell me
also,
anything.
does that tell me it's from the abyss? Because I don't know that I think of the abyss as just being filled with poison.
Yeah,
In fact, it's really low
right.
on my list of things I think of, unless we're talking about a particular plane or two. You know,
Yeah,
Zuckmoist
yeah.
plane, sure. You know,
And that was the second part of this is some of them don't make any sense. In the abyss, a creature might deal double damage to objects uh, as a trait because it's an abyssal something. I have no idea why that makes sense, other than it knocks down big things because of the blood war, maybe, I
yeah.
guess. But
Another
how
way
many times are the monsters going to go after the characters and deal double damage to objects?
Another
Not
thing is, if you just look at the traits, can you guess the plane, right? Like merry music.
right.
Whenever the creature casts a spell or makes a spell attack, the faint sound of merry music can be heard, and by those affected by its magic. Recklessness. At the start of its turn, it gains advantage on attack rolls during that turn, but attack rolls against the creature have advantage, so it kind of rages. Reckless
Yeah.
attack from Barbarian. Uh, that's Arborea.
Yeah.
And okay. Um, I guess, like maybe, but I'm not so sure. And it's sort of like that. Like I like the overall concept of these, and there are some neat, traits here that are fun. I mean, I love monster powers, right? I mean, that's one of the things we did for Forge of Foes was to add things like this that say, like, when you want to make a monster that's of a particular kind, it's a big hulking brute, then let's give it something that does it. But the emphasis we tried to do is things like, if you're trying to represent a giant, then when it hits you, it shoves you back, right? Or when it slams its foot down on the ground, it might shake the ground and people fall around it, right? Those are things that really clearly represent what this creature is about. And I don't feel that there is that same equivalent, like deep, yeah, this is what it does. But it's a lot of space in this book. So,
Yeah. And it's, if we go back to third edition and fourth edition, we had templates, right?
mhm.
We had abyssal, we had demonic, and it feels like this is what they wanted to do, but either didn't feel like they could or didn't feel like they should. So they just sort of picked a couple of things and added them, and some of them didn't make sense, and some of them you would never know, as we mentioned earlier. And some of them are cool,
Mm-hmm.
but just don't they just don't quite get across, either story wise or mechanically, what I, as the game master,
Mm-hmm.
either want to do or need to do to really make this something memorable for the players.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they just couldn't. Maybe I don't know. Maybe the designers were told, no, we can't make templates. So just do your best to make powers that sort of, without changing things too much. But even then, some of them are huge, like Peck Tactics, right? That's huge. That's super powerful.
Yeah.
Uh, and then other ones are like hear tinkling sounds when you cast spells, hear clanking sounds or hammering sounds when you cast spells or use magic. I'm like, okay, that's
Yeah.
like
And
back tactics.
yeah. And the things like, structural repair for something from Mechanist, it can be in continuous physical contact with a non-magical object for 1 minute to repair the objects as if it cast mending. Okay, that'll probably never come up, but it's so they're all over the place in terms of how applicable they are. On the other hand, the lightning rod, while it may not come up very often, is fun. It can bounce lightning damage to other creatures, which is kind of neat. And it can't be reduced below 1 hit point by lightning, and so that is kind of fun, even if it doesn't come up very often. I like it a lot. There are some neat ones here, but they're a little bit all over it. And this is another thing where I wish the book would say that I don't even know that the 5e designers as a department believe in this, that you, the DM, should really alter these to be whatever you want them to be, and that this is not a truth, or not the only truth, right? Like sometimes it feels like it's a little bit like some of these feel like they are really like prescriptive. This is what these creatures are.
Yeah. So I appreciate the effort, and I even appreciate the follow through on some of them. I love the fact that like in Limbo, random thaumaturgy effects go off. Okay, I could have fun with that.
Yeah.
If you score a critical hit or perform a critical hit or receive a critical hit, random things happen. All right, that's going to happen during a combat. A slide tadpole erupts from you upon your death if you're a creature from Limbo. Okay, cool. I could have fun with that. So like Limbo, I'm like, cool. I'm all about that. Some of the other ones, I just needs a little more oomph, a little more mechanical oomph, and a little more story oomph, I think.
Yeah.
But that complete list is there, so you can pick and choose from them if you want to make your own versions that fit your needs very well.
Yeah, and then we get this little section here that Denizens of the Outlands, which is trying to kind of provide little encounter ideas by type: aberrations, beasts, celestials. And it is good in that it's trying to answer this question of like, let's forget about being in a particular plane. What if I have a particular type of creature? What might I be doing here? And what are some, here are 4 possible quests. And there is one that's really funny. I think it was in this area that there was a dejected red slad wishes to be reunited with its slad tadpole, but it isn't certain where or in what it implanted its egg. Hilarious. But in general, what I found, these are again sort of like little quest bits that almost detract from whatever it is that you're probably trying to run. It's a little side shunt thing rather than something you can really use as the heart of what you're working on. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the axe-wielding flump influenced by Ysgard, who's questing across the land, seeking legendary beasts to slay and epic songs to sing. Unless we're going to modify that flump, it still has 7 hit points, and it's not going to last very long in this story.
Yeah.
All right, what'd you think of this little section?
Yeah, it was sort of the same with me. And then I thought back to how popular on the DM's Guild a series or several series is of products called Encounters in. Encounters in Shawn, Encounters in Avernus, Encounters in. I checked back for my sales on the DM's Guild this month. Like the 4 most popular products that I contributed to so I could see the sales of were those products.
Wow.
Encounters in Baldur's Gate is like my most popular selling. I only, contributed 20 or so encounters, but they are so popular that there must be a call for this. I don't necessarily want it in my core books, right? And
Yeah.
I want I want other things,
Hmm.
but I have a feeling that there is an audience for this. And so wizards, designers, planners, producers are serving that need by putting these things in here.
Yeah, I guess
Not for me, but I
I
can
would,
understand it.
I would wonder. There are a lot of ways you can do this, right? So, like, I can create a random encounter table, and there's also a random encounter section here, and I can say 2d4 slot. I can say one slot seeking its tadpole.
Mhm.
And then I can get to maybe the, like, say, Tomb of Annihilation has these, like, a paragraph for each, which is what
Mhm.
I think what those encounters in
Yeah.
often did, right?
Mhm.
And there was some really good design care taken in those. The
Mhm.
ones that I've looked at, I may have all of them, but when I remember looking at them and thinking, these are neat, fun ideas, right? There are some cool concepts that I can easily flesh into a whole encounter. And they tend to be like an encounter, right? So it's the idea of, like, if
Mhm.
I were to say, a Modron surrounded by Slod has information vital to your quest.
Mhm.
That is something that works in my campaign.
Mhm.
A Slod seeking to find its tadpole, I don't know, maybe it might be a distraction, right? Like, so
Mhm.
there are different ways you can structure these, and I'd be curious if you really dug into the data. What is it that people want? I'm not saying I know, but
Right.
I would think that there's somewhere in that variability we're either serving or not serving our audience. I worry that this is too much of the not serving an audience. That there aren't
I
enough ideas here to really use and get utility out of. But what do I know?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? I agree with you in this sense. Like I said, I could come up with these things, but I don't know if everybody could.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
and so,
and maybe even going off of what we heard when we talked to folks in the audience at our seminar at Game Hall, there was this idea of, like, I want to see ways that I can create campaigns in and do things in my own homebrew worlds, because so many folks are running just homebrew stuff, not actual published adventures. They may buy the published adventure, but they tear it apart for pieces. So I think, again, the more that this is like an actual building block that you can pull into your
mhm,
homebrew, then that also serves a purpose. But if it's too light, then it might not, right? But if it shows you the kinds of stories you can create, then it becomes more useful.
mhm. Yes. So then we get to, from Denizens of the Outlands, we get a planar encounter section where we encounters in the chaotic planes and the evil planes and the good planes, neutral planes, etc., etc. And I think that the same thing
Hmm.
follows here.
Yeah.
It's interesting, maybe not quite in depth enough, but I don't need 1d4 Razorvine Blights uh, as just I have the book monster book in front of me. I get it. I could just go through and do that on my own. I need a little bit more.
Chaotic planar encounters, 1d6 pteranodons. Okay.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah,
wouldn't have thought of that, but okay, I guess.
yeah, yeah. Uh, yeah. So like you were saying, Teos, here I agree that there's not enough, that there needs to be
Hmm.
give me a little bit of a story. Give me a little bit of something to role play, a little bit of something to add to the story that my players and I are telling. But okay, cool. Now we get to the meat of this book, which is the bestiary A to Z. Obviously, we're not going to go through all of the monsters, but what are some highlights that you noticed?
So there are a number of groupings by type where you get several monsters, and in fact, maybe more than half the monsters are in that kind of situation. So, like, there are two cranium rats, a cranium rat swarm. There are three demodans, three githzerai, uh, three Gardenals, five Modrons. These Romani, which are living metal bipedal creatures. There are three types of Romani. They all start with the letters for the element: AU, Aramak, Cooperlak, Ferromak. So somebody really liked the periodic table. Various
Mhm.
age categories, the Time Dragon. And then there's some individual ones that are notable, like the Baronaloth, really weird ancient Yugoloth, CR17, the Dabus we've talked about, Darkweaver, this creepy spider that wants to taste things. The Eater of Knowledge is pretty cool. It's a blood brain large aberration. Looks like, I held it up one point, looks like a bunch of kind of blood, like a blood golem kind of thing. And it can stun you and extract your brain. And one of the things it does is it gets sent out there to like get information and bring it back to like the mind flayers it serves. The Kolyarut, which is this inevitable, and to represent its inevitable nature in its CR20, it does things like always hit, right? It just knows what to do and enforces laws, I guess, as swords. Yeah, what else seemed interesting to you, Shawn?
I did like the fact that they gave more than one of each type, because that gives you flexibility as a DM. Other than that, I thought, okay, cool. It's a planar monster manual. We haven't had a lot of planar beings other than demons and devils, so let's do it. I thought it. Yep, there's a picture.
I want to talk about this Flump Modron. That's
Okay.
what that is, isn't it? Am I making that up? That looks like a Flump Modron.
Lower the book a little bit.
Let's see. So it's these little guys. They're like, it's like a.
Okay. Let me look. Modrons.
That is not what I expected from a Modron, but there it is. And there's some big ones and medium ones.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see what you're looking at. Huh. They look like little squids. little squidrons.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure we needed that guy, but we have him. So
there you go.
I did like the Vargul reflection. It's just CR1, but it's like a Vorgul, right? So it's the just the head with like kind of like tendrils at the bottom, and it's horrible, nasty, out of nightmares. But the head looks like whatever the creature was, and it can curse you to become one. It can also make itself look like your head as it fights you to frighten you. I thought that was a good move.
Yeah, Vargoyles are one of those really nasty, both in terms of their history and their description, as well as what they actually do if they defeat you. So yeah.
Horrible.
Then we also get faction agents in this portion of the bestiary, and these are 12 ascendant faction members. So in general, there's one stat block per faction. So if you need a Doomguard member, if you need a Harmonium member, a Transcendent Order, you get two of those, but otherwise it's just one, so you can sort of get an idea for what they do.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on those?
These CRs vary, and I guess they're just trying to give you a variety. So I guess it's better than not. But it it may not fit what you want or whatever story you're telling when you're interacting with the Harmonium or the Transcendent Order. Is there a particular CR that they should be? I don't know. So they just tend to be kind of sort of medium CRs, medium low. And that made me think, well, like this is fine, but maybe as a DM, what I need is more a system by which I can make anything a member of the Doomguard, anything,
Yep.
A member of any of these 12 factions, to me would have been a little better, right? And I'm not sure that this is as useful as it could be. Like, could you just take generic stat blocks and have traits and powers that you add to them based on them, right? That's what we did for Forge of Foes. And that's what I would use really for faction agents, because you can take Forge of Foes, like we talked about in our last episode. You can just, even online, find that core stat block for a given CR. So it's CR blah, here's my core stat block. Now I could take the things that are in these stat blocks here for these faction agents, and then I can just use Forge of Foes to bring down to the power level that it should be. What's the attack, save, damage, whatever. And that to me is a lot more useful, because I get like one Bleak Cabal member that's a half orc, but what about making it an elf or a devil or a whatever, right? Like, because this is Planescape. It shouldn't just be this humanoid that usually is what all these are, is just humanoid members of it. And maybe I want to make it a boss or a minion, because if I'm writing an adventure that deals with this Doomguard, I'm not going to work with just 2 stat blocks, right?
Yeah. And I wrote the same thing in my notes. We had the planar influences, which, while we didn't love every single one of them, at least it could move us in the right direction. Just, I would have loved to see the same thing here. Members of the Bleak Cabal, you could take the veteran stat block and you can add this.
Yeah.
And just give the one cool thing. And if they're CR, if you're using CR 3 or lower, give them this one cool thing.
Yeah.
If it's 3 to 9, give them these 2 cool things. And that way we know that they're a Bleak Cabal member, and they have this cool thing, and we see it once. Yeah. Okay, it's just a one-off. Oh, we see it. Now there's a group of them that are all doing this thing. Now we know. And it adds to the story as well as to the game mechanics of this game that we play.
And we've seen that before. I know this because we put it in ACK Inc. The Acquisitions Incorporated book has factions in it, and it has that kind of approach to it, right? Just add this trait to it, including sort of attack things that they do and stuff to represent their nature or their position.
Yep. So anything else? What are our overall thoughts here on this second book of the Planescape trilogy?
I thought, if I think about like other similar books, which there isn't a whole lot that is a slipcase, but sort of setting books that are sort of like this, I think that in general the execution is better than other similar books, even if we're being a little critical in our sort of discussion or analysis. Generally the monsters do evocative things. They do a solid job of being exciting and tell the story of the creature. The damage could often be higher, but you can use Forge of Foes for that. I think the selection of monsters is okay. It's a variety of planar creatures. It may or may not fit the kind of story you want to tell. It's interesting. You can't populate like a given gate town with them, right? Like if you're in the Beastlands gate town of Faunel, you got Cardinals, maybe a couple of others from this book. That's all you've really got, And so do you want to put the Modrons in your Beast town? I don't know what you're doing. You got to go to other books for that. But it's a short book, right? So that's the kind of thing it does. One thing I noticed is layout issues, and I'll see if I can hold this up for folks watching the video, but they tried so hard to cram things that they're weird, like big, like that's a big blank spot. And it's because the art for it is actually in that big picture. But then they're also trying to like often cram other bits all into, one place, like really trying to make it all fit onto a page. And so it just feels like this book, they tried really hard to make it only 64 pages. And it kind of wants to sometimes be a different size, I feel like, looking at the layout of it.
Okay, I only looked on D&D Beyond, so I didn't get that feeling, but it makes sense.
If you were to take this and make it soft cover, and instead give me those pages back, what could this be, right?
And that's something that you actually could do with a box set, right? You could have 2 hardcovers, and then put a soft cover in there. Maybe they'll cut price down. I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting. Any other overall thoughts? I agree with you. I think this was, for what they could do in 64 pages, I think it contained a lot of good information. The monsters, everyone loves monsters. And if you are a relatively experienced DM, you can pull apart these monsters and put them back together in ways that are better for your campaign, for your players, for your story. So I think in that sense, it all works out and it all makes sense.
Cool. Yeah, agreed.
All right. So we have finished with book 2 in only one episode, because next time we are going to move on to book 3, which is the adventure called Turn of Fortune's Wheel. And we will go through it. We will pick it apart. We will tell you what we think of the adventure, both as an adventure and as an introduction and a blueprint for how adventures should run in this Planescape setting. Thank you so much, listeners, for doing what you do, which is letting us invade your ear holes, and in some cases, if you watch on YouTube, your eye holes, for yet another week. Thank you for those of you who fill in our Patreon so nicely. Thank you to our Master of Dungeon supporters. A special shout out goes to our Master of Realms supporters in our show notes and our Masters of the Multiverse. Well, you know what happens. You get mentioned right now. Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Craig Bailey, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Evil John, DM Chad, Darren Chandler, Seth Eckel, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon, Nathan Fuller, The Mighty Jerd, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst, Chad Jackson, Brian King, Jim Klingler, a.k.a. DM Prime Mover, Chad Lynch, the Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, the Micro Ant, Sean Molly, Falcon Neal, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Ross Sandberg, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simolse, David Somerville from Prismanox.com, Joe Tyler, James Walton, and Graham Ward. Thank you. If you would like to become a patron of our show, you can indeed do that, and we would indeed appreciate that. You can do so by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. Also, if you get a chance, leave us a review on Apple Podcast or by whatever means you listen to the podcast, because that helps up our visibility, especially if you have nice things to say. And you can also subscribe to us on YouTube, which is very handy as well. So, Teos, where can people find you, and what have you been up to lately on social medias?
Find me at alphastream.org. This week, I'm going to share a video of me playing through the 3D Spelljammer that's in the Neverwinter games. If you want to be like, what does it look like to stand on the deck of a ship and look around at the stars and fight, creatures on planets and bounce around on an asteroid with very low gravity, you'll be able to see that this week. What are you up to, Shawn?
Nice. I am up to a lot, but nothing that is so important that I have to mention it on this show. But sometimes I mention it on social media. So you can follow me on all the social medias that are out there popular at Shawn Merwin. The podcast is also on various social medias at Mastering DND. Join our community, ask questions on our Patreon Discord, or leave comments on our YouTube channel, Mastering Dungeons. So, Teos, we've seen the menagerie of monsters that are out there in the planar multiverse. What are we going to do now?
I'm going to go petition WizKids to have that flump Modron made into a miniature. I clearly need that so that, you can take a flump and then have battle mode flump, that's all encased in metal.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to go petition the higher powers to give me another day in this week so I can get my work done.